Start video.
Zandile is getting set up. Yolandi, you're looking at the master designation, am I correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I typically use the practitioner designation as the example when in this workshop. There are one or two things that are slightly different for the master, but we'll talk about them. That is an additional issue. But if you're okay, and the principles are common across all of the designations. So I think you probably should be good there.
Andy, just a note, I see that.
Hey, Zandile. Sorry, Andy.
No, I just wanted to speak for Zandile and say that she is on the technician.
Okay. So again, maybe I'll take the technician designation then instead, Zandile, rather than the practitioner, because neither of you are looking at the practitioner, which is fine.
Yeah.
Let me just get the documents.
Yes, and I think the reason why was that because Angelique did specify previously that there were no recordings for a technician workshop where maybe I could suss some information from there. So I think this is a great opportunity for me.
So I've got a presentation which we can go through because that picks up all the key issues. Also have a look at the support material, the guideline document, and the workbook that I guess each of you have. You've received that?
Yes.
But so the presentation should talk to most of the questions that you have. However, as we go through this, please don't feel that you can't ask a question. If you've got something to say it, ask it, comment on it. Tell me if I'm talking nonsense or being confusing or whatever. Let's address it as it happens. You're good with that. All right, so let's put cameras off now because often there are bandwidth issues, and I'll walk you through the key issues that sit in putting your portfolio together. That can go away, and this can get bigger. Okay, and everybody can see that. You're good. And leave your mics unmuted as well, so you can just talk when you want to. So essentially, there are 6 things we're going to talk through here. 1 is what is meant by professional designation. 2 is what are the guidelines given to the evaluator, which you can then use to guide yourself. Thirdly, what are the steps? Fourthly, how will you actually be evaluated? And then last bits is the practicalities of submitting your portfolio. Okay. So just firstly, the question is, and useful to think about, what actually do we think the promise is that's made by, I'm going to get rid of that because it's going to irritate me. What is the promise made by a professional? When we say somebody's a professional, what are we talking about? And it's interesting to think about it in the sense that we have a lot of graduates who cannot find work. Okay. And at the same time, we have a lot of employers who say they cannot find competent employees. So how on earth, what's going on here where there seems to be a lot of supply and there seems to be a lot of demand, and these two parties are not meeting each other? And often it's the catch-22 for a graduate, is that, if you have a qualification, why does the employer not want you or not promote you? Which obviously puts pressure on, to your parents who paid your fees, or if you've got a loan and you paid all of that stuff. How do you explain that? And so if you think about what a professional designation is, and think about the last time, for example, you went to see the doctor. Let's say, for example, you've got to go and have some major surgery. So you've got to go and find a surgeon to do this surgery. And you're probably going to try and pick somebody who you think you trust, that you think that they're honest and they act with integrity, they act ethically, and they have a high quality of work, and they're reliable, they can reliably do that stuff. So often what people are saying is, I want a surgeon, I had to have a heart procedure done 2 years ago. Done, I'm fine, by the way. But I had to have a heart procedure done. It was really comforting to me when I went to the specialist who says, listen, I actually specialize in these operations. I do dozens of them every week. That's what I do. And I felt, okay, this guy's reliable. I'm feeling a lot more comfortable. And so that judgment is based on a track record of success that I had seen, where and a consistent high performance from that person, and that they stay current. They know what's current thinking as the best practice. So that is essentially what you're saying. If you say, I've got a professional designation, you embody these sorts of things. And so that is our guideline as to, if we're going to give somebody a professional designation, we need to know that you've got a proven track record of success, that you're up to scratch, you operate with consistent high performance, and that you're current, you know what's currently going down, and obviously that you operate in an ethical environment. If you think about what's made you effective in your job, probably you've done some studying, but as with many things in the world of work, the most part of what's made you really good at what you do is what's happened on the job. It's not so much, formal learning is often it's an important foundation because it gives you baseline knowledge, and the informal learning, but typically about 70% of what makes you really good is because of the experiences that you've had at work and the problems that you've overcome and the different circumstances that you have encountered. So the promise then is consistent competency and professional conduct in a wide variety of situations. So that's what this whole portfolio building exercise is trying to tap into. Can you give us evidence of consistent competency on your part and professional conduct in a wide variety of situations? So what then are the evaluation overall guidelines that we use? Okay, the first one is that we go to the designation descriptions. That's our starting point. And we look to say, what is set out in that designation description, and can we confirm that you fit this profile? And essentially, if you look at a designation description, there are 3 key elements in it. One is it says you must have an underlying qualification. 2, it specifies a minimum amount of experience. And 3, it specifies a number of competency areas where you must be knowledgeable. In other words, a variety of competence situations. Now, if you look at any of the designation descriptions, they all have the same format then. Here's the one for the technician. So here's the minimum qualification. It says you must have at least a level 4, which is a matric. Okay? And if you think about the administration work and the people who are operating administration jobs in the skills development field, there's not a particular qualification that's absolutely necessary. Many people have left school and they move into that field and then they learn on the job. So the baseline qualification is not a very senior qualification, it's a level 4. The experiential learning experience says at least 3 years experience as an administrator in a related field, okay? And then there are 4 competencies that you need to be competent. One is administration of plans and reports using templates, okay? So in other words, taking the templates and working with them. Second one is about capturing data for planning and reporting, and it's both for things like a mandatory grant report, but more importantly, it's capturing data for the organization so that it can use that in its planning and reporting. So for example, administrators are often engaged with ensuring that the learner portfolios are there and that the credit information is captured onto the organization system, and then you draw reports out of that. That's that one. Third one is about coordinating skills development opportunities, which is typically, and often the role of a technician is, that's the person who often says, you've got to go and draw up the calendar for this particular program and make sure that the venues are booked and make sure that the learners are all informed. It's that thing. And the last one is about liaison with appointed vendors and contractors based on the workplace skills plan. So that's that conversation. Often if you have an external vendor, the people in administration are responsible for making sure that the standard service level agreement is signed and sitting in properly signed by both parties, however many parties are required, and sitting in the right place on the company systems so that it can be referenced, and similar sorts of stuff. And if there are changes that need to be made to the calendar, for example, those are the people who do the backwards and forwards to make sure that the revised dates are acceptable to everybody, the learners, the suppliers, the management, the managers know about it. So it's that sort of, so that's the role of the technician. Role of the master is also got the 3 sections here. It's a level 7 qualification, and it's in a field that's related to skills development. Okay, it's at least 5 years at a strategic or executive level in an area relevant. Okay, plus some nominations, and then there are 4 competencies required of a master. So one is a research and recommend at a national or international level on strategies. So that's a data gathering and a recommending. It's analyzing and putting forward useful recommendations. The second one is about designing, implementing, advising on a strategy. So that's typically at a master level, you formulate it, but now you mastermind how it's implemented. The third one is around masterminding a quality management system at a national, international level. Let me just differentiate between local, national, international. Typically, our definition of national, international, national is probably the key one, is we're saying people who are working in either a corporate with branches all over the country, which gives you, and the different provinces have different demands. So it's dealing with it at that level. Obviously, international is similar. Or you might be dealing with for example, a Gauteng-based business where it's all sitting in Gauteng, but there are different lines of business. So again, you've got a level of complexity there. That's different to somebody who's dealing with, for example, a training manager in an organization that's sitting in one place and it does one thing. So that's the thing that we're trying to tap into. People who are working at a master's level are dealing with a significantly higher level of complexity. Last one is providing strategic input at a national, international level, dealing with issues related to learning or employment or BE or return on human capital. So that might be not necessarily making a specific recommendation, but sitting on a task team that is dealing with issues like that and giving your input at that level. So you'll see that, as I said, there are 3 core elements that are similar across all of the designations, that they vary in terms of it. So that's the thing that we must now look at and say, well, can you convince your evaluator that you can tick all of those boxes? Make sense? Questions? Everybody's quiet. Please respond. Tell me that we're yes.
Andy, the 2 nominations it's testing, is that the testimonials that they're referring to?
Yes. So essentially what it's saying at a master level is you've got to get 2 credible people to confirm that you've actually made an impact in an organization at a national or international level.
Okay.
And we'll talk a bit more about that, but essentially you probably need to draft a testimonial to make sure that they comment on the things that you want to comment to them on. And by the way, getting testimonials is very common in trying to get a designation like this. You know, the reason being, often the exercises that you want to use, the examples that you want to use happened maybe some time ago, a couple of years ago. And at the time, you know, you didn't collect evidence because it wasn't necessary. Now it may be very difficult to get evidence. So often you'll want to say, listen, I didn't collect stuff, but I can get people, credible people, to confirm that it happened. And that is acceptable evidence to the evaluator. Does that help?
It does. So would that also be existing testimonials that we might have?
It could be as long as they meet that requirement.
Okay.
So for example, they need to comment and provide information that it's at a national, international level. There needs to be enough that the evaluator can say, yeah, yes, I can see why, that this is, that the candidate is saying this is at a national level rather than a local level.
Okay. Could you use two supporting pieces of evidence, for example, the testimonial and a report that maybe the testimonial doesn't speak to a national or international level, however, the report does?
I think let's look at, later on we'll look at the rubrics and see, because that'll help you decide whether it meets the requirement or not. The rubric is what the evaluator uses and what you can then use to guide yourself. So you can then apply your mind and say, well, actually, if they're looking for this, does what I'm going to give them actually address it? So let's come back to that. I mean, it's a good question.
Okay.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about qualifications and working experience. Firstly, qualifications. Now, if you don't have a qualification that meets the qualification requirement, we do have an RPO process that you can follow. So don't worry if you don't have a piece of paper. There are alternatives. We'll come back to that if that. It's not often the case that people need that, but it is available. In terms of confirming your years of working experience, your obvious piece of evidence is your CV. Okay? So you'll see that we ask you to provide us with a copy of your CV. The one thing that I would suggest to you, typically the CVs do provide details on job titles and dates, who the employer was, all those sorts of things. What they are sometimes lacking is in terms of describing what the responsibilities are. And for example, I've seen CVs where for example, say, I have a list of, and I've got a list of like 10 things that I was responsible for. And one says leadership programs. One says QMS, one says whatever. As an evaluator, it's quite hard for me to know whether did you design the leadership program? Did you implement the leadership program? Did you mastermind it and other people delivered it? What was the actual detail of what you were doing there? What were you actually responsible for? So what I would ask you to do then is when you go to your CV, make sure that when you describe responsibilities, you give enough information so it's obvious to your evaluator what you were actually responsible for. Hence the comment there, detailing processes and results that the candidate is or was responsible for. We want some detail there. That's probably the biggest area you need to upgrade in your CV. Then, Yolandi, probably just important for you, the nomination or the recommendation. In fact, both the master and the practitioner require this. It's not required for the designation, at the technician designation. The nomination must be signed by somebody senior to the candidate or by a client if it's an independent. I'm going to change this word to professional because it's a bit misleading to say an STS because we're not talking about STS only. Must confirm in the opinion, and look, this is more relevant to the practitioner designation. In the case of the SD master, recommendations from at least 2 seniors attesting to contributed impact. Okay. So the policy guidelines then that we need to follow, and I've already mentioned them to some extent. The first one is that the evaluator must have a clear take on what's the difference between a qualification and a designation. And I think it's useful for candidates also to make that clear in your own minds. Because coming from an L&D environment, most of us are very familiar with qualifications. So our thinking often reverts to that rather than what is required from a professional designation. So let's look at a qualification for a minute. A qualification guides assessments that in turn define the learning content. So if you've ever done any design to create a learning content for a qualification, you start with a qualification. What is it saying? What are the assessment requirements that sit in the qualification? And then you develop learning material that talks to what's being assessed. So it's very specific. around what sits in the qualification. So the assessment exercises are against a specific learning program. There's that very clear line of sight. Also, then it becomes a finite body of knowledge and application that's being assessed. And it's one that the learner has studied with a strong focus on knowledge and application of knowledge. Typically not much on workplace experience, it's on learning. And of course, once you've got your qualification, you've got it for life, there's no need to keep up to date. Now, if you contrast that with what we said about what a professional designation promises, there's some crucial, important differences you've got to bear in mind. One is the designation is about work experiences, okay, that show competence against those broad competency descriptions. And it's essentially RPO, but I would rather call it recognizing prior experience, RPE exercise, where you're looking back over your working career and everybody's got vastly different experiences. And therefore finding evidence to confirm your competence against those competencies can be hard because you're looking at naturally occurring evidence typically. You're saying, yeah, you asked me about my ability to, let me think of one, to implement at a strategic level. Look, I ran a leadership program for this major organization with branches all over the country 2 years ago, and it was very successful. But now, how do you get good evidence that of exactly what you did and of exactly why you say it was so successful? And so often you'll need guidance to help you find relevant examples within the time frame that have evidence that back up what you're saying. And as I said, it's often hard to prove this naturally occurring evidence that you have, which is why often you might want to use testimonials. And what you really are trying to do is you want to show consistent good performance over a number of years, not just once. You know, when they say with a qualification, you just have to get the answer right once to show that you've learned it and then you're good to go. Whereas with a designation, it's not okay to get it just once. You've got to show consistent good performance. And lastly, that you've remained up to date with what's happened, because I mean, our field of learning particularly is under such dramatic and profound change that keeping up to date with what's going down is difficult and it's going to remain difficult because I think we're in major paradigm shift in the learning environment. So that's what we're looking at for this process. And I've said most of this already. So our process focuses on the competency descriptions, and you'll find some activities to guide you as to what might be good examples. And it's requiring you to look at examples from your own working experience and to back that up with evidence that meets VARC's requirements. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. So the minimum requirements then, our policy says that you must provide evidence against at least 75% of the designation competencies in your designation description. So it's not all of them, but it's at least 75% of them. And that you must provide fit for purpose examples of your workplace experience that show your competence. And it must be over a period of at least the number of years in the designation description. So those are our minimum requirements for the designation competencies. Questions? You guys okay?
Yeah, and I have no questions. Thank you.
So how is this evidence different to what you might do to get a qualification? Well, firstly, it's examples from your own work experience. That's where it's coming from. It's not looking at theoretical examples. It's not responding to a knowledge test. It's saying, think back over what you did and use that to confirm to us that you are competent. And it's about practical application. It's about practical experience. And in a sense, if you like, it's what you're trying to get the SABS stamp of approval that you are at a professional level in terms of an ability to make change in the workplace, which reduces risk for the client. That's the big promise of a professional designation. Your designation reduces the risk for your client of using you because it confirms that you have this competency at work. So to be fit for purpose, we're going to ask you then to think of examples from your working experience, and we're going to require you to answer 4 questions in explaining each example of your working experience. And these are the questions. First question is, give us a context. What is the example you're going to use? Describe the background, describe the circumstances surrounding the example, the context, and or the situation where this example arose. So for example, in a leadership program, you might say, I was tasked to implement a leadership program for this level of leadership and organization that comprised X number of people. They are situated in these provinces, and the key focus of that was to deal with these issues. So that gives you a context for the example. Question number 2, how does your action in this situation show your competence? So what was your job? What was the role that you played? What action did you take? And you must give enough information so that it's clear what you personally did. Now, this is particularly relevant for people in the practitioner or the master designation, because often there you are working not on your own, but you're working with a team of people. Which is not to say that it's, if you are responsible for a leadership program, but everybody else is doing the work, you are still the person held accountable if it's a disaster. So there's no disconnect there. Issue is you must explain that. What was your role? What action did you personally take in the situation? Question number 3, why is it a good example? And in order to do that, you need to be able to say, well, these were the results that were achieved. These were the outcomes that were achieved because of what I did. And it's good evidence against this particular competency. So explain that. And then the last question is, okay, now that you've given us this explanation of what you did and why it was successful, why it was successful, can you give us evidence to confirm that? So what evidence can you provide that confirms your role or actions and the outcomes of your action? And so there you're going to then give us a number of bits of evidence that says, okay, I can show you what I did. I've got, for example, minutes of a meeting that describe what I was accountable for. And we also did some evaluation after the event. The productivity improved. We can see this from the KPIs or whatever the evidence is that you can think of that says, yeah, people believe this was successful because this and this and this happened. What is that? Can you now give us evidence to confirm that is the case? So those are the questions that we're going to ask you to answer for each example of your performance that you want to include in your portfolio. Now, you'll find that there are in the guideline document, that PDF document, you'll find, and we'll go and look at it in a short while, you'll find that there are in red the rubric that is used by the evaluator in determining whether you've given a sufficiently clear explanation. So question number 2, how does your action in the situation show your competence? And you would have, in this white cell here, you'd have written, I did this, I did that, I did the next thing. And this is how it links in with the competency. Okay. Then the evaluators award 1 point if this example of the activities undertaken by the candidate is relevant. Award 1 point if there's a good and clear explanation of the role played by the candidate. If the candidate is a member of the team, then the role played by the candidate or the responsibilities they were held accountable for must be clearly outlined, and maximum 2 points for this particular section. So that's what the evaluator is using. Well, some of the things that go wrong, by the way, here is often we find candidates don't describe their own role, what specifically they did. They give a general role description. It says, we normally do this, we normally do that, we normally do the next thing. That's not specific enough. What the evaluator wants to see is, for this particular program, I met with the team on these 7 times to do A, B, and C. This was the step. These are the steps that I went through in this particular example, very specifically. So make it specific. That's what they're looking for. And I'll come back and look at this in more detail as we go through the guideline document. This is just a quick take on how many examples you need. So for the technician, you must comment on 3 of your 4 designation competencies. You must give at least 6 examples over 3 years. The master, you've also got only 4 competents, so you must have at least 3 of them. Also at least 6 examples, and your time period is 5 years. The types of evidence that you could use, this is probably more relevant to the practitioner designation, but it could be approval letters from the seat that the mandatory grant report was accepted. It could be documents you created, but they must have your name, be confirmed by your manager, that sort of stuff that show your role. Minutes of meetings must have your name in it, and it must show that you weren't just a passenger in the meeting. You can't just have been one of the attendees, but you don't appear anywhere else in the meeting. That doesn't help the evaluator to confirm your role. Email correspondence could be used, letters of reference could be used, your testimonials. Actually, I'm going to put that word in there because it's useful. And progress reports. Stuff that isn't helpful. Okay. This is a key one in that be aware of the POPI Act. So if you have, if there's evidence that you want to submit that contains personal information, please redact it. Take a black pen and strike out things with names in and such like. Things that also don't help are general policy documents or government gazettes or acts or regulations. That doesn't talk to your own role at all. It's not, and it just takes up space. Circulars, practice notes, and memos also that your role doesn't explain your role, so it's not helpful. It just takes up space. Again, same with organization policies, processes, and procedures. Irrelevant plans or budgets that you did not personally, in which you did not personally carry out any tasks. Emails or correspondence where there's no mention of your role. Attendance registers of meetings that you did not attend. So, focus in on stuff that helps the evaluator understand what you did and what results specifically were obtained because of your actions. And then, of course, it must meet BARC's requirements. So whatever evidence you submit must be valid, must be authentic, must be reliable, must be current, and must be sufficient. Okay. And there is more of an explanation in the guideline document. We'll come back to it. Okay, so that's the context. You're having to develop some or find some examples from your past working experience and then give them to us and explain them in some detail so that we understand what role you played and what results that were attained because of what you did. And that's really what you're completing in that workbook, the Word doc, that workbook, is you write that stuff in there, and when you're done, and you've collected all your evidence, you then need to submit it to us. Now, the submission, okay, let's just talk about the workplace examples. I think I've covered quite a bit of this. So bear with me if it's a bit repetitious, but the workbook is where you're putting examples of your own work competence. You upload the workbook in a Word format, and we will have sent you a link. Angelique will have sent you a link to your own folder where you'll upload your workbook in Word. You also will be uploading evidence for each example. And an important thing is that you might have 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 bits of evidence that are relevant for each example. Make sure that you map the evidence. So you provide, so we can actually, you might have, in total for all your examples, you might have 50 or 60 bits of evidence. So make sure that for each example, it's very clear which of that 50 or 60 we should look at. So you do some sort of mapping, and I'll show you that. And also you upload that evidence. Your folder looks like this. Typically, you'll find when you go to your folder, there's a place for your workbook, there's a place for supporting evidence, and there's a place for snapshots. Those are the key ones I want to talk about first. So the workbook folder is where you work, your workbook in Word goes. And the workbook in Word is a working document. So if you need to make any remedial work, you go back to the same workbook in Word and you add additional information in there. Okay. Also, you'll find within your workbook is a place for a declaration of authenticity. And I'll talk more about that, but that also will go into that folder where you've signed off that this is your own work. The second folder that you've got is for all of your evidence. Okay. please, and I'm going to reiterate this a few times because it bears repeating, but please make sure that you don't have one document in the supporting evidence folder, one PDF with all of your evidence. It becomes very, very difficult for the evaluator to find a particular piece of evidence if it's loaded like that. Rather, what we want you to do is to load each piece of evidence separately. So hopefully you've not got one piece of evidence, one file in there. You've got maybe 50 or 60 different files, but then you must make sure that they are numbered clearly and they've got a unique title so we can find them easily. And don't make any subfolders. It's all one long list of evidence. Now, what happens when you tell us that it's ready for evaluation? What will happen? The first thing is the evaluator will go to your workbook in Word, they'll open it, and they'll save it into the snapshots folder as a PDF. And that provides us with a snapshot of your original submission. And you'll see that they'll name it there. One, your name, initial submission. That's how it's going to be named. And so we can always go back, you and we can go back and say, what did you initially submit to us? It's there in PDF. Then they will do the evaluation in your workbook in Word. It's going to be in a different color to you. And then they'll save that into the snapshots folder as a PDF. So now we've got the second snapshot, which shows what the initial evaluation was. And then you can go and have a look at it. If you need to do any remedial work, you'll go back to your workbook in Word and you'll add more information in there in a different color so it stands out. And when you've done it, you'll tell the evaluator and they'll go and open up the workbook in Word and they'll save it as a PDF and they'll name it as 3, your name and remedial submission. And that, obviously, that's only if needed. And they'll add their comments, again in a different color, and they'll save that snapshot in PDF. So we can see in the snapshots folder, each step of the process is very clearly set out. Does that make sense? Am I confusing or is it clear? Talk to me. Is everybody still awake?
Yes, it's all clear on my side.
Okay.
And I'm awake.
Okay, good to know. Okay. And I've said this already, but I'm going to repeat it. How to submit your evidence. It's obviously all done electronically. So we don't take any paper copies. It's all done electronically. It's usually a PDF. Occasionally, people might want to submit audio visual material. Obviously, if that's electronic, it can be accepted. It's a separate document for each piece of evidence. Each of these documents has a unique number and a name. And it's all in the supporting evidence folder. Oh, this I'm going to take out because it's not for each example you give, you'll just the evidence that's relevant to that example. And I'll come back and it'll make more sense. So when we go to the supporting evidence folder, it should look like this. Okay. It should not look like this with subfolders. So it's one long list up to however many bits of evidence that you've got. You'll see I've redacted this because this particular submission had some identifying information that was private, so I've redacted it. What goes wrong most often? Okay. When you are numbering and you name your evidence, you don't do it well. There should be consecutive numbers with unique names. Then it makes it easy to find them. Sometimes the evidence doesn't go into the correct folder. Sometimes when you cite evidence, you don't give the full name that you've given the piece of evidence in your supporting evidence folder. You often leave out the number, makes it difficult to find. Sometimes we see irrelevant evidence, stuff that's not actually talks to anything in the workbook. And sometimes the other thing that often goes wrong is in remediation. You can't easily see what your new information is, and it has to be in blue. This is the convention, by the way, for what colors should be used. So when you initially submit, you're just typing it in black ink. Okay. The evaluator will make any evaluation comments in red. And then you've seen that on the earlier example. if you need to submit anything in your workbook as remedial information, you would use blue ink, please. And then the evaluator will remediate that in purple. And then lastly, there is a verifier who then checks the whole process. And say that the verifier does much what a moderator does, looking at the work of the evaluator and confirming that it's up to standard. And
Andy,
that's
can
done
I
in
jump
green.
in?
Yes.
So when you submit your remedial evidence, do not change anything that you did in your initial submission. You add your remedial after the red from the first evaluation. You're not going to change anything that you've previously submitted. You add to it.
Thanks, Angelique. That's a very helpful comment. That's exactly the case. Okay, so remediation guidelines. Do make changes in blue. Do add more evidence if required. Don't remove any original evidence. Exactly what Angelique said. Your timeline for doing remedial is within about 3 business days of feedback from your evaluator, unless you agree a different timeline. But we suggest you get this thing done. Don't let it drag on, because if there are big gaps, you get feedback and you decide that you've got to remediate, but you wait 2 weeks to do that. You then got to rework through the whole blooming thing to work out what was there originally and what needs to be changed. And the evaluator has the same issue. They've got to basically re-evaluate from scratch if there's too long a timeline. So we say to you, please try and work within 3 business days to submit anything that needs remediation. And again, Angelique's comment, don't overwrite the existing workbook when you submit remedial work. Just add new information to it. You'll find in there, in the workbook, is this declaration. And I'm just going to talk about it for a quick minute. You are saying, I declare that all the evidence I've submitted is work that I have completed personally or been directly responsible for. I've not submitted evidence that I was not responsible for or that was completed by someone else. So that's the key thing. I understand that if it is found that I've submitted work that I've not done personally or been responsible, I will be subject to disciplinary, because it breaches our code of conduct about operating ethically. And that can have serious consequences. You can lose your designation, you can be blacklisted as a member. And the last thing you say, I'm ready for the evaluation, I'm submitting this portfolio of my own free will. Now, you'll see it's in the workbook. What we want you to do is to print out that page separately, sign it, and upload it as a separate PDF into the workbook folder, just for reasons of document security. So that's kind of the quick cook's tour on the presentation. We're going to move on to the workbook in a moment, but so just to say, this is your process. Start with your CV, get your updated, get your qualifications, and get them certified. Identify the examples that you want to use, identify the evidence and start gathering it. Then write out the examples, describe the example. Get your evidence together and list it properly, and then upload that and using the link provided, and then let us know. Because you may be uploading. We don't move on to the evaluation phase until you tell us you are ready. Questions? Are you good? Can I move on to the guideline? Okay,
Yes.
going there. All right, so this is the guideline document for the technician. The one for the master's designation follows the same format. Let me make it full screen. Okay, a bit about the purpose, not very exciting. This is your process. So registration, you've done. You've probably done the self-evaluation on our website. This is the workshop now. You then move on to creating your portfolio. When you're done, you submit it for evaluation. The evaluator will review and give you feedback. And we require them to give you written and verbal feedback, because we accept that trying to find naturally occurring evidence can be difficult. And often having a conversation with your evaluator can guide you to think of areas of evidence that you might not otherwise have thought of. So it's not a cold process, it's a supported process. Remediation if needed. For the master designation, there is a panel interview. It's not needed for the technician designation. So once the evaluator is done, it moves on to the verification. And verification, if the verifier supports it, it then goes to the certification committee, who are the people who make the final call about the awarding of the designation. And then we tell you. And then after that, you need to continue with your CPD. And that's a quick cook's tour of that thing. And it's spelled out there. This is, you've seen this already. Timelines, and we've spoken a bit about this. Okay. And there's some deadlines that we've set out there that you can have a look at. So 2 months to compile a portfolio. The evaluation shouldn't take more than 3 weeks. 2 weeks for the evaluator to do their work and for remediation, which is why those 3 business days are important. We've actually set here a maximum of 5. But if you can make it 3, that's better. So start to finish, this could be a quick process if people apply their minds to it. So we recommend that you begin the process when you're ready to do it and you've got time so we can deal with it. Be aware that if you do not complete the process within the 3 months from the start of the evaluation, in other words, when you paid your fee, you may be required to pay additional fees because we have to track what's happening. Even before it goes to the evaluator, our administration is tracking what's happening. So that's not, it can't be an open-ended process. Similarly with the evaluation, if it drags out and the evaluator has to go back and do evaluations again from scratch because so much time has passed, you might be required to pay additional fees. So please try and work within that 3-month period if at all possible. Okay, now a lot of what you'll see in these next bits we've actually discussed in the presentation, so I'm not going to linger on them. You'll see familiar slides coming up. Definition of ARCs, okay, saying your evidence must be valid. And I'll come back to this if anybody requires any guidance, but these are fairly standard definitions, so I'm not going to linger on them, probably fully aware of them. The 4 questions that we've spoken about. How you complete this, and I've already spoken about it. You write in these white cells, the evaluator works in the gray areas. And the color coding we've spoken about. Here's the interesting stuff. So these are the rubrics. Evaluator will be using the guidelines in red to evaluate the evidence you present. So your qualifications must be certified within the past 6 months. They must meet the appropriate NQF level. It says, what does your designation description say? For the technician, it's a level 4. For the master, it's a level 7. Okay, so that's what they're looking for. Minimum number of credits and in the field that's relevant. The years working experience for the technician, it's 3 years. Okay, so they will look for in your CV, your position, titles, dates, and job responsibilities in enough detail. We spoke about that. And employers. Okay, must include contact details of the most recent employer, because the evaluator may choose to do a reference check on the most recent employer to confirm whatever you say. And obviously the response must be relevant to the competencies in the designation. Okay. In the examples, we've spoken about a minimum of 6 fit-for-purpose examples, and you've seen this here already. Okay. That's the rubric for question 2, we've discussed it. Rubric for question 1. 1 point, if the description provides clear and unambiguous information about the context. It, for example, it must clearly explain what needed to be done, what result was required, who the key role players were, and so on, and should link to the position on one of the positions on the CV. And if you give a clear description of the context, you get a point. If your explanation here is appropriate, if it's relevant, and if your role is clear, 2 points. Question number 3, why is it a good example? Award 1 point if there is a successful outcome because of the role played personally by the client, by the candidate. The description of the successful outcome should include an outline of the impact on the organization that is then supported by evidence. Okay. So is there a successful outcome? And then award 1 point if it's enough to confirm competency? Is it sufficient? Does it give, is it like a one-off thing, or is there enough information here in terms of the example to say, yes, you can see some sort of consistency of performance? So the candidate must ensure that the explanation provides a clear line of sight between the actions of the candidate, the results obtained, and the competency, and there's a maximum of 2 points. So you can see that the total number of points you can get is 5. Now the rules are this: a minimum of 5 points is needed. In other words, if your explanation is not sufficiently clear, this example will not be accepted as relevant. Even though you might give lots of good evidence, you need to explain it very clearly in questions 1, 2, and 3. You must have got a minimum of 5 points. Then, if you've done all of that, you've got your 5 points. Now you need to provide some evidence to support what you did, your actions, and the results that you've described. And so you would list in here the evidence to support those two things. So it's a list of the evidence, should just include evidence that's relevant to this example, okay, not other stuff. It must meet VARC's requirements. If it does not, the example will not be evaluated as fit for purpose. But the evidence can include a number of things, okay? And you've seen them there when we've spoken about them. So the evaluator will be looking that it meets these requirements, and will comment on that in here. And then they'll give you an overall. And so the issue is here, is it accepted or not accepted? So the section is completed by the evaluator and will confirm whether this example is accepted as fit for purpose or not. To meet this requirement, the explanation by the candidate must achieve 5 points, and the evidence must meet VARC's requirements. So in other words, it must be enough evidence, it must be valid, authentic, reliable, consistent, and sufficient. And it will be captured as either accepted or not accepted.
One other thing on this, say you have, for example, 2 WSPs that you're doing in 2 different examples. Don't copy and paste from your one example over to your other example. It must be unique stories for each competency. You can't just copy and paste all your answers that you made in the first one throughout. It has to be unique stories.
And the logic for that is that it's very, very unlikely that you will have exactly the same experience in 2 different instances in your working life. That seems very, very unlikely. Life is not that simple. There will be variation. So describe the example specifically. So in 2019, I submitted them in the mandatory grant report. This is what happened. These were the people. And I did a similar mandatory grant report 2020, 2020. But it worked slightly differently, and this is what actually happened. So that's why we're saying don't copy paste it. It's not convincing to the evaluator. Okay, where are we on this thing? Just keep on going down. Okay, there is an appeal process. So the appeal process is available to you if you don't like the results of the evaluation process. So if you think, for example, the evaluator and the verifier are being unfair, you can appeal that and say, listen, I actually want this to be done by a different evaluator. So the appeal process becomes available to you after the verifier has completed his or her work. And the reason for that, obviously, is that if the evaluator has done a bad job, the verifier should pick it up. Okay, so you don't have to worry about it until, if you, at the end of the day, you say, hang on, both the evaluator and the verifier have not applied their minds to this, and therefore I'm going to appeal it, and it's a formal process. You write to us and you say, I want to appeal this. We will appoint a new evaluator if you do that, and the new evaluator will then go through the evaluation process again. They'll go back to your same portfolio, and they'll determine whether they believe the evidence meets requirements or not. If the new evaluator overturns the recommendation by the previous evaluator, then actually the cost of that will be covered by the ASDSA. However, if If they don't overturn it, then you're liable for that cost. And you'd have to pay the cost for the new evaluation process. Okay. Then something on, and we've spoken about this, how do you upload? Where do you submit it? And again, evidence requirements. And here's an example. And you'll see here, by the way, look at this example. You'll see, look at the evaluator feedback. So the evaluator said evidence 3 and 4, and obviously referring to that there, confirm the role played by the candidate, and evidence 1, 2, and 3, and 4 confirm the successful outcomes for the organization and the CETA. And you'll think back to the approval, to the rubric. They want confirmation of the role, and they want confirmation of the successful outcome. And this is a mandatory grant report, so the successful outcomes, both internal in the organization and external, the CETA, must both approve it to be sure that it's a successful outcome. And then a comment about redacting. And you'll see there's an example of redacting and the declaration of authenticity. And again, we've covered this already. Now, in your guideline document, there are a couple of other resources that could be helpful for you. So one of the things we did was we said, let's think about typical activities that are relevant for each of the designation competencies. So for the technician, your first competency is administer organization skills setting plans and reports using templates and guides. We kind of did a bit of a brainstorm. What are the sort of activities that might guide you to find examples? So if you've done any of these things, that might help you identify an example of your own performance that you can include. Well, these are just really thought starters. And this is for the second competency, some thought starters for the third one, there for the fourth one. And there's a very similar thing in the master portfolio, Yolandi. And then this is an extract from a portfolio workbook. This is from a practitioner. And you'll see this is what the candidate wrote. Here's what the candidate wrote. This is what the evaluator had to say about it. Candidate wrote that, evaluator wrote that about it, here and there. And then we actually already seen this. This is the evidence supplied. Okay. And it was accepted. And here's the evidence. So you'll see it's been redacted. So this was a mandatory grant report for 2019-2020. And it's signed, this went to CETA. So the company name has been redacted, people's names have been redacted. And similarly for 2020, similar exercise. And then minutes of committee meeting in 2019. I was the, this is actually one of my clients. So I was there, SDH. We'll see my name is there. So I've redacted the other names and any apologies. But you can see my role is there. And similarly for the other bit of evidence that I've used. Questions? Cool. Let's then quickly look at the workbook. I think it's probably big enough. So your workbook, this is your working document and you'll stick with it all the way through. Please put your name in there, your stuff. The evaluator will complete there. You've seen that. Okay. So now you start putting together your evidence. You always work in these white cells. The evaluator always makes comments in the gray areas. So what you're going to do here is list the actual document name of the evidence that you're submitting. So this, for example, might be, let's say your CV, you've named it as 1.Andy Reinecker CV. So what you'll type in here is 1.Andy Reinecker CV. And in your supporting evidence folder, the evaluator will find a document that is named 1.Andy Reinecker CV. Does that make sense? Sorry, that's qualification. That should be there. 1.Andy Reinecker CV. Here will be 2. Matric certificate or 2. honors degree in whatever your document name is. So the evaluator will then make comments about it as to whether it meets the requirements or not, and they'll say whether it's recommended or not yet recommended. Okay. This you've seen. So here's your first example. You'll see, so it says competency A.
Sorry, Andy.
Yes. Yes.
I just have a question, and I think it's on page 4 of the workbook. In there it speaks to, I think it's the one just above that. Go one page higher. Okay, so it looks like, let me just look at my workbook. So it looks like I've got an extra page.
Look, let me get out that workbook. Can you see yours? Can you see the master one?
Yeah, you can.
Yeah,
it does, but you see there's a page between this page that you're showing us now and the one above that. So between these two, my page actually speaks to, yeah, it says list of evidence presented, guidelines.
You might have the previous version.
Oh. How much work have you done on it, Yolandi?
I have started populating it.
It's just that list, Andy, it's that list that we had at the start that we took out.
Yes.
List of evidence.
We've done a revision of the workbook. You don't need to make that full list at the beginning because it actually doesn't add any real value to you or to the evaluator. So you don't need to do that. You can either stick with that workbook and just ignore that table, or if you wanted to use this is version 12.0, which we just launched this year.
Oh, and I'm on version 10.7.
Yeah, so if you want to use this version, we can send it to you, or you can use your the one that you've already worked on. Your call.
Okay.
You just let us know if you want 12.0.
All right, I will do. Thank you.
Oh, I understand your concern. Okay. All right, so we're here. So, okay, so you'll see that for every competency, here's competency A, there's an example 1. And then on next page is again competency A, example 2. And then if you go on to the next page, you'll see it's competency B now, and example 3, and then competency B and example 4. So you'll see that in the workbook, there's place for 2 examples per competency. Now your target is 75%. So it's if there are 4 competencies and 2 examples each, that's a possibility of 8 tables. You only actually need to complete 6 of them. That's the minimum requirement. And you'll see here is the place where candidate, you'll write it up and the evaluator will give feedback and so on and so forth all the way through for each of them. All of these templates are the same. All the way through. So I'm just going to scroll through if you don't mind. Here's your declaration. You said, please print it, sign it, scan it, and upload it to the same folder that you use for your workbook. Okay. Extended candidacy. So what sometimes happens is that when the evaluator starts looking at the evidence, it's very clear that the candidate actually lacks exposure to all the areas of the competency. And they therefore might need a longer time to get their portfolio together. So for example, you want to write stuff up about managing a quality management system, but you've never actually done it. Now, that's not something that you can rectify in 3 days. You're going to need like 6 months of working on it before you can say, okay, I've actually got enough evidence to meet the sufficiency requirement in that VARCS thing. So if that sort of a situation arises, then you can sit with your evaluator and say, okay, what are the things that I need to do now to get my portfolio fit for purpose? What are the missing bits? What then can I do to try and fill in those missing bits? So the action might be, well, I need to spend 6 months working on managing the quality management system in our company. Who internally in my organization do I have to convince to allow me to do that? And how long is it going to take? Well, it's going to take 6 months. And, you know, there might be a few actions that you need to do. which means that overall, when do I think I might get that done? What's my anticipated completion date? So I might say to my evaluator, look, we've had a good chat. There's 3 things I need to do. It's going to take me until August this year to do that. So I'm going to resubmit this in August. So that sometimes happens. If it does, we'll deal with it at the time. It's not typical. And then the last page is something you have to complete yourself. This is what the evaluator will use to track progress. So they will say, for example, 1, does it meet requirements or not, and so on and so forth. And there's a place for them to put in terms of the remedial as well, and timing. And here's where they do the sign off. So that's where they'll track particularly if you need to do a remedial. Questions? Is it sounding sensible and logical? Is there anything that's worrying you?
Hi, Andy. Hello.
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to find out, I've just moved organizations, and for me, it's pretty tricky getting my information, as in the skills development technician role that I'm currently doing. So is there any other way, or do I have to wait until maybe I attend, maybe say the next meeting, or should I submit currently what I have when looking into the fit for purpose questions and adding competencies against that?
If I understand you correctly, your difficulty might be in getting evidence to confirm what you did, or to confirm that the outcomes of what you did. Is that your difficulty?
Yes.
That's a hard one. I don't have an easy answer. It might be useful just to spend some time trying to identify examples where you can get that sort of evidence, and then decide if it's going to work or not. You might need to get into a little bit of the detail before you, in your own mind, you can know whether it's going to work or not.
All right.
I'm afraid I don't have there's not a standard answer to a thing like that. You really need to look yourself and say, well, apply my mind to, is this going to work or not now? I mean, if you can get it done now, it's always best, but I hear what you're saying.
Or is it possible, maybe from previous employment, to get evidence of that as well? Would that be
yes,
okay?
You can. We've said the issue is going to be currency in the last 3 years. So if you need to go earlier than that, you could include that evidence. You need to explain to the evaluator what your difficulty is. Particularly in a technician designation, I think that it may be easier to accept earlier evidence than that. How long were you in your previous position? How many years?
5 years.
5 years. But do you think you've got evidence from before then?
Before 5 years?
Yeah.
No. I just moved, like I'm 3 months with the new employer, and 5 years with the previous, yeah.
The previous employer. And without wanting to pry, is it likely that they will not support you in providing evidence?
No, I don't. In relation to some of the questions that are there, I feel as if I haven't gone through some of the things with the current employer.
Look, if you've gone through them with the previous employer and you can get some sort of confirmation that it happened, yes, then that would be good, that you could use.
All right, that's great. Thanks.
Yolandi? Oh, Yolandi, so there's a couple of additional things for the master designation. Yolandi, your portfolio is the same. But in addition to that, there is a panel interview that's required for the master. So it happens after the portfolio is done. The panel interview is about a future-focused look at what you think your contribution will be. So we'll deal with that, when you get to that point.
Just on that, are there some guidelines or procedures in preparation for that panel interview?
We'll give them to you at the time.
Okay.
And you don't need to it's not a hell of a lot of preparation. It's a bit of thinking rather than gathering evidence.
Okay.
I wouldn't worry about it until you get there. It's not typically an onerous task. I think step one is get your portfolio together.
Okay. Is the interview like a job interview?
In what sense?
Just in terms of...
Stop stressing, Yolandi. Stop stressing.
Okay, so I'm not going to think about it until I get there.
That's best.
Yolandi,
In very simple terms, what that panel interview is about is saying, where do you see yourself going? It's that sort of an interview.
Okay.
Where do you want to put your energy and your attention in the future? That's the nature of that panel interview. And we'll give you more information at the time. It's not a big mystery, but I think, rather get the portfolio done first and don't worry about it because it is not an onerous thing to do.
Okay.
Yolandi, we will be asking you for the rights of your firstborn child.
Oh, yeah.
Start being very afraid.
Don't say that. People might believe you.
Angelique.
Colleagues, I've said my bit. Yolandi, is there something else that you want to comment on?
Yeah, I think just one other question, or maybe for clarity from my side. With each of those categories, there are at least 2 examples for each category. And I know you initially said we only really need to provide evidence for 6.
So sometimes, you might give 2 examples for competency A, 2 for B, 1 for C and 1 for D. You could do that.
Okay.
Or you could just do 3 of the competencies and not 4. It's really your call. Where do you find the most compelling examples in your working experience that you want to use?
Just on the evaluators do prefer that you complete more than what is required in the portfolio of evidence, just in case one of your competencies that does not go through as a valid one, then there is always 2 extra ones that you've submitted. It removes the fact of maybe having to do a
mediation. And look, I have examples. It's just, I think for me now deciding which ones would fit more relevant in those categories.
I think the key things that I would use to decide is to say, am I able to describe my role very clearly? Am I able to describe a successful outcome very clearly? And how easy is it to get confirmation of my role and the outcome? And those are useful questions to ask in deciding whether the example is useful, you should use it or not. Okay.
So then I probably go back to one of my initial questions, and that was, if there's a report and a testimonial for that, and let's say the testimonial could validate 2 reports or 3 reports. Could I use the testimonial as evidence as well, including all 3 reports?
You can.
Okay.
But then, the testimonial needs to be really specific. If the testimonial is saying Yolandi does great work, it needs to confirm what you did specifically and that it was successful specifically. Otherwise, the evaluators hang on. It's not enough. It's not sufficient.
Okay.
So it could be, but look at it critically and make up your own mind. Often my experience is that you don't easily find enough of the right evidence. You say, well, it's, I'm kind of 80% of the way there, but it's actually not enough. I'm going to need to use a testimonial. So I'm going to write to so-and-so, and I'm going to say to them, I did this, I did this. This is what we actually achieved. Please, will you write and say exactly that back? Because my evaluator is going to watch it. It's that sort of a thing. So, getting them to talk, not in a general sense, but very specifically. Andy ran the program. It was really difficult because A, B, C, and D happened. But it was very successful because this is what the result was. These people didn't move, or that person got promoted, or whatever the case may be. That's powerful evidence. And it's easier then for the evaluator to say, yeah, I'm actually happy it meets VARC's requirements. So I tend to encourage candidates to draft the testimonial because then it allows you an opportunity to make sure it's specific enough. And people are not going to sign it if it's nonsense.
Yeah.
They're credible. They're not going to sign something that's nonsense because it's their credibility on the line. Any other questions? Last chance, guys.
No, I think I'm good for now. Thank you, Andy.
Okay, cool. Sandila, you got any
Yes.
final questions?
Nothing from me. I'll try to gather as much evidence as I can, and during the course of adding data to Dropbox, I will then liaise with Angelique.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah. That sounds grand.
Yes, that's perfect, Sandile. And then you can also, if you do struggle and you need a little bit more time, just let me know, and then we can talk about an extension, but try and keep to the deadline.
Yes, and you did mention that it takes 3 weeks after submission to get a response from the evaluators.
3 weeks.
That sounds terrible. Our target is no more than.
Okay.
We put pressure on our evaluators to do the work as quickly as possible. So that's our internal target.
All right. No, perfect. Thank you very much.
Well, then, thanks everybody, and look forward to seeing your portfolios.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you, Angelique.
Pleasure.
Okay, then. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.